morning, and thank you for joining me on the path to liberty. I'm Michael Bolden with the 10th Amendment Center, and this is the show for Wednesday, January 18th, 2023. And today I want to talk about something that I can never talk enough about. That is trusting government, trusting people with power, something no one should ever do. Now, a lot of people claim that they don't trust government, but as soon as their team or their preferred people get power, all of a sudden, instead of getting warnings about them exercising power, we'll hear excuses or hear them find ways to say that this is okay. So on this episode, I've got some highlights of a really great article that was published this week by John and Nisha Whitehead from the Rutherford Institute with some amazing examples, well, not good ones, of how power is abused no matter which team is in power. And of course, I'll throw in some quotes and some insight and advice from founders like James Madison, Thomas Jefferson, John Adams, Patrick Henry, and maybe a few others. But before getting to that, a quick hello, a huge thank you. Thank you so much for being here. Whether this is your first episode or you've been here for every single one since day one, I can't thank you enough. While we allow people another minute or so to get notifications to join us on the live stream, these mainstream platforms, Facebook, YouTube, Twitch, Twitter, etc., they're not always the speediest with sending out notifications. I want to say hi to everyone out in the live chat and give everyone another minute or two to join us. Liberty Revolutionary, good to see you, buddy. Kirk Morrison in South Carolina. Israel in Colorado. Tim Martin, good to see you in Arizona. Erwin Havernick in Omaha. Clay Kent, Alt Reality. Rodolfo. Rich W. in Washington State. White Bearded GNU, good to see you, sir. Dixie Strong in Bama. Lawrence Smith. Rodolfo again. It's a good screen name. Rich Cowboy Roy Rogers, Jay, Joseph, and everyone else. I appreciate you being here. I know I've missed a few people, but please continue leaving some comments, whether live, especially in the archive, because that does help trigger algorithms of these mainstream platforms and tells them to show us to more people. Let's start out the beginning of this article that I want to highlight from John and Nisha Whitehead at the Rutherford Institute. They may have originally published it last week. We just ran it here on the 16th, a couple of days ago on Monday. And they ask, how do you trust a government that continuously sidesteps the Constitution and undermines our rights? Well, you can't. They write, when you consider all the ways that we the people are being bullied, beaten, bamboozled, targeted, tracked, repressed, robbed, impoverished, imprisoned, and killed by the government, one can only conclude that you shouldn't trust the government, well, with anything. They could have just ended it there, but they wanted to say with your privacy, your property, your life, or your freedoms, and they give some amazing examples. But first, before getting to that, I want to highlight a couple of views on this from, well, Federalist and Anti-Federalist alike. First, from John Adams. This is from Notes for an Oration at Braintree, spring of 1772. And so you don't have to look all that stuff up. First of all, the article from John and Nisha Whitehead, plus all the original source documents that I'm going to be citing here. I've got a couple other episodes that I want you to check out as well, in case you haven't, to give more insight into a particular issue. I will link to that all in the show notes. We publish a blog post, or at least I do, about 1 to 2 hours after each live stream is done. And there you're going to find not just all the different platforms we're on, the video platforms, the live streaming ones, the archive, the audio-only podcast ones, but there's a show links section. So you're saying, okay, where did this John Adams quote come from, Bolden? I want to see it in context. Well, there will be a link there for Adams's Notes for an Oration at Braintree. And here's how he put it. Trust no man living with power to endanger the public liberty. And the way we always put this when we share this particular warning on social, because as we know, when people get power, they tend to, well, use it in ways that we don't like. And Adams was no exception to that. The Atlas of Independence, once he got into power, well, did some stuff that wasn't all that good. So you should trust no man living with power to endanger the public liberty, including the people who tell you trust no one with the power to endanger the public liberty. So don't even trust the people who give you good warnings, because once they have power, human nature tells us that power will grow or be abused. So on the anti-federalist side of the spectrum, here's old Abraham White, one of my favorite lines on trusting people with power. This is, he was a very ardent anti-federalist in the Massachusetts Ratifying Convention, and he put it this way: I wouldn't trust a flock of Moseses. So here was a very religious man who was saying, even if you had a flock of Moseses in power, he wouldn't trust them either, because power is the problem. Human nature is human nature, and people with power will tend to abuse it. Anyways, back to John and Nisha, and here we get into some examples of how government continually violates trust and power. The Constitution attacks your liberty. They start with, don't trust the government with your privacy, digital or otherwise. And this should be obvious by now, but for some reason, for many people, it is not. In the 2 decades since 9/11, they write, the military security industrial complex has operated under a permanent state of emergency. We'll always have a state of emergency, and it's probably gone a little further than that. That in turn has given rise to a digital prison that grows more confining and escapable by the day. Wall-to-wall surveillance monitored by AI software and fed to a growing network of fusion centers. Fusion centers are state-federal partnerships. There are about 70 of them in the country. And they're basically just information sharing, surveillance collection apparatuses for the states and the feds to work together to violate your liberty, violate your rights, and then share it with everybody. So if you happen to be caught up by a red light camera in Boise, Idaho, or an automated license plate reader here in Southern California, or a drone surveillance camera in Boston, Massachusetts, or it doesn't matter where, these get fed into the fusion centers and through ISE information sharing environment, another post 9/11 information sharing tool. Everybody everywhere has access to that information. They build profiles on people, and we know they can do all kinds of nasty stuff with that. Anyways, wall-to-wall surveillance monitored by AI software and fed to a growing network of fusion centers render the twin concepts of privacy and anonymity almost void. I covered a lot of these surveillance tools in an episode a couple of years ago. Well, now almost closing on 3, Patriot Act on steroids. A lot of people think that the only part of surveillance that we have to worry about is the Call Detail Records Program, Section 215 of the Patriot Act, but there is a ton more that came from Patriot Act and its successor. And here's the overview. Again, Patriot Act on steroids, surveillance state beyond Section 215. I will link to this episode in the show notes. It's got a ton of info. And it's everything from fusion centers and information sharing to national security letters, the TSA enhanced screening, and the growth of facial recognition. They all come from the Patriot Act and its successor. Again, I will link to that in the show notes so you can learn a little bit more about that. Now, one thing that I don't actually have in my notes here or up on the screen is James Otis's great speech against the writs of assistance. This is back in February of 1761. John Adams, at one point, or many points, actually referred to Otis's speech as the beginning of the controversy between the colonies and Great Britain. And that's what he called the real American Revolution, was a shift in the way that the people thought about their relationship with government. It was a shift in the views of sovereignty, that the people held final authority, that the Constitution was the supreme law of the land, written or unwritten. And James Otis in that speech, for example, said an act against the Constitution is void. It wasn't up to government to determine the extent of its own powers. If government went beyond its limits, it doesn't matter if government thought it was okay, then it's void. It's just up to the people to treat it that way, too. So Otis gave this about 4 to 5 hour speech against the writs, and he argued against what they called general warrants. General warrants, the idea that you could actually be up for a search or a seizure because you just happen to be in an area at a particular time, or these days a cell site simulator where anyone who just happens to be owning a cell phone and carrying it with them and are within the range of a tower, in some situations, that could be 10, 15,000 people. The government is going to collect all your data. They're going to collect it through this cell site simulator, and it's going to pass through it seamlessly so you don't even know. Your text, your web searches, your phone calls, etc., all get downloaded into the cell site simulator before the call gets completed in milliseconds. You notice no delay, and that is a general warrant today. And Otis said the only legal one at the time were those special warrants. They called them special warrants to search houses or places specially named. And this was the beginning of the controversy between the colonies and Great Britain. So part of the foundational principles of the American Revolution was an opposition to mass warrantless surveillance. And we have it everywhere today. And it comes from both sides of the spectrum. They want us to be afraid of the terrorists coming to get us, or whoever it may be. There are always bad guys, and government has to have this kind of unlimited power, much of which the revolution was fought over. Anyway, so next up we have James Madison here. He says, where an excess of power prevails, property of no sort is duly respected. Without property, you can't have liberty, and that's without property rights. Because you have self-ownership, the ownership of the fruits of your labor, the ownership of your home. That's the basis, the foundation of liberty to so many in the founding generation, the old revolutionaries. Adams put it like this: property must be secured or liberty cannot exist. And John and Nisha Whitehead, that's their next one they want to point out. Don't trust the government with your property. And this, again, I know for you, this is probably very obvious. For many others, they think that government is there to protect their property. But absolutely not. They say if government agents can invade your home, break down your doors, kill your dog, damage your furnishings, and terrorize your family, your property is no longer private and secure. It belongs to the government. And mind you, that isn't even getting into the taxation as theft argument. That's for another day. They say that hardworking Americans are having their bank accounts, homes, cars, electronics, and cash seized, civil asset forfeiture by police, under the assumption that they have allegedly been associated with some criminal scheme. So property has to be secured, but property is not secured. And for those of you, and anytime we talk about property rights on this show, I always see some comments, and they're spot on. Like, oh, in my state, you have to rent. You can't even own your land. You're paying property tax on it. So basically, you're paying a fee for it. Next up, we're talking about debt. Spending, government power, throwing loot all over the place, printing it out of nowhere. Here's how Brutus, the great anti-federalist writer, put it. I can scarcely contemplate a greater calamity. The worst thing that he can think of was to be loaded with a debt exceeding their ability to ever discharge. Man, I stumbled all over that one. I can scarcely contemplate a greater calamity that could befall this country than to be loaded with a debt ever exceeding their ability ever to discharge. Sometimes I struggle with these. Anyways, that's what we have today. Tens and tens of trillions of dollars of debt. They're not even counting when they say in the 30+ trillion range. I'm not even sure what the latest national debt clock says. They're not counting all the unfunded mandates. I've seen as high as $150+ trillion is the real number. But that's what John and Nisha say. They say, do not trust the government with your finances. They say the U.S. government, and that includes the current administration. A lot of people, again, this is what I was getting at the beginning here. My point was, so many people will say, oh, we don't trust government. But that only means the opposing party. And as soon as their team gets in power and does pretty much some version of the same garbage, all of a sudden it's just fine. And they're making excuses for it. And I'm glad that they pointed that out in this article. The U.S. government, and that includes the current administration, includes them, it's not limited to that, is spending money it doesn't have on programs it can't afford. And we, the taxpayers, we, the slaves, are being forced to foot the bill for the government's fiscal insanity. The debt, at least at the time of their writing, $31.3 trillion and growing, $300 billion in interest every year on the public debt. I haven't verified those numbers. I'm sure they're pretty legit based on the type of work that they've done, but they're insane numbers. And you don't get to that point if it's just the current administration. It has to be all of them in our lifetime that are spending money it doesn't have on programs they absolutely can't afford. Next up, we have Thomas Jefferson, and we should talk about our health and well-being. And Jefferson pointed that out as well in his notes on the state of Virginia. He said, was the government to prescribe us our medicine and diet, our bodies would be in such keeping as our souls are now. And that wasn't a positive thing. He wasn't pointing out that if the government was in charge of health care, of how what we chose to eat, maybe creating a food pyramid of sorts or something like that, we would just be doing awesome. He was warning against that type of thing. And John and Nisha also point out, don't trust the government with your health. They say, for all intents and purposes, we the people have become lab rats in the government's secret experiments. And they've got a nice list of a bunch of, well, it's not a nice list. It's a nasty list of bad stuff that they've done. MK Ultra, race-based testing of mustard gas on 60,000 enlisted men, secret experiments, all kinds of nasty stuff. And I'm not even getting into some of the more recent things as well. But trusting government with your health, the people who have more power, the largest government, the largest empire in history, is not the organization to go to with the most important things in your family, your food, your health, and the like. And next up, of course, is the right of self-defense. St. George Tucker called it the first law of nature. The first law of nature. And again, we're not talking about Second Amendment rights as a quick aside. We don't get our right to self-defense from a document, from an amendment, from any words on paper. We get it because we are humans. This is a natural right, according to the founders and old revolutionaries. And Tucker said the right of self-defense is the first law of nature. So the first law of nature is part of your right to life. And John and Nisha Whitehead said, don't trust the government with your life. This should be so obvious, all of these. And they say at a time when growing numbers of unarmed people have been shot and killed for just standing a certain way or moving a certain way or holding something, anything that police could misinterpret to be a gun or igniting some trigger-centric fear in a police officer's mind that has nothing to do with an actual threat to their safety, even the most benign encounters with police can have fatal consequences. I think a lot of this, really the cause of it, is because we don't live in a culture of self-defense, the natural right of self-defense, because so many people are relying on the government to protect them when government isn't there to be a security force. Even their own words, they're basically going to just at best respond after the fact. So people are leaving themselves in very dangerous situations, and then the people who go, and don't often have positive things to say about government enforcers, but if you think about their situation as well, they're often thrown into very dangerous situations. And it's always after the fact, and you get this type of crazy stuff. So we should not trust the government with our lives. We have to take responsibility for our own freedom. Here's Benjamin Franklin, who I cited pretty widely on Monday's episode, highlighting some of his views over the years in commemoration of his birthday, which was yesterday. He said, as all history informs us, there has been in every state and kingdom a constant kind of warfare between the governing and governed. This was in the Philadelphia Convention, June of 1787. All history informs us. The people in charge have had some form of a warfare against the people themselves. They are not protecting liberty, so don't trust the government with your freedoms. Don't trust the government, period. John and Nisha write, for years now, the government has been playing a cat-and-mouse game with the American people, letting us enjoy just enough freedom to think we're free, but not enough to actually allow us to live as a free people. And if you think about what makes a free people, and John Dickinson, the penman of the Revolution, for example, he asked this specific question, who are a free people? In his famous Letters from a Farmer in Pennsylvania in 1767 against the hated Townsend Acts, these were the most widely read documents on American liberty up until publication of Common Sense in 1776 from Thomas Paine. And he asked, who are a free people? Not those, and I'm paraphrasing, not those who just happen to be living up under a government that happens to be respecting their liberty. That is not a state of freedom. If you happen to get people in office, whether it's at the law enforcement or sheriff level or at local politics or state politics or courts, and they just happen to do the right thing for a certain amount of time, mind you, they will only be in there for a certain amount of time, that is not a state of freedom. That is not a free people. That is a population on its knees begging for permission. The people that are free, according to Dickinson, are those who live in a situation where government is so checked and controlled that as soon as it tries to get out of line, it gets slapped back into place, and that really is up to the people. And here's how Thomas Jefferson, of course, put it. A free people claim their rights as derived from the laws of nature and not as a gift from their chief magistrate. And of course, we always get the question, and I did an episode on this just over a week ago, what do we do about it? No matter what we cover on this show, no matter what articles we share, we hear people ask us, what do we do about it? Yeah, you're right on this. John and Nisha make some great points, but how do you turn things around? Well, I answered that question the best I could from the founders and old revolutionaries in an episode, What Do We Do About It? I will link to that in the show notes, 10thamendmentcenter.com/path-to-liberty. Ultimately, it gets down to this. This is how Patrick Henry put it in the Virginia Ratifying Convention. He said, show me that age and country all through history. Now, Patrick Henry, he was not considered to be the great historian like people like, for example, James Wilson or James Madison or others. But at least at that time, if you were to grade on a curve, basically everyone would be far better off than, as far as like students of history, they were looking into far more stuff than most people today. Anyways, that's a short attention span issue that maybe we can cover another time. But Patrick Henry said, show me that age and country where the rights and liberties of the people were placed on the sole chance of their rulers being good men without a consequent loss of liberty. So as long as you're waiting on people in government to do the right thing, you will always lose liberty in the long run. And he said, I say that the loss of that dearest privilege has ever followed with absolute certainty every such mad attempt. It is absolute insanity to Patrick Henry. I agree with Patrick Henry to rely on government people to do the right thing. Now, of course, when they do the right thing, we want to encourage them to do more of the right thing. But if you're just relying on it, you will absolutely lose liberty in the long run. Well, let me take a look over in the live chat and see if there's any comments or questions that I can get back to. I should mention that if you support us getting this kind of message out to more and more people, nothing helps us get that job done more than the financial faith and support of our members. You can join us for as little as $2 a month over at 10thamendmentcenter.com/members. We also have annual 5-year lifetime options that cost a little bit more, but we appreciate the support, whatever you're able to throw our way. And with that in mind, I do want to say a quick thank you to just a handful of people who have joined us as members recently. I really, really, really appreciate your support. I can't say it enough. There's Heath in Nebraska, Allison in Wyoming, Wayne in Arkansas, John in Pennsylvania, Jill in Missouri, Mick in Illinois, and Tim in Kansas. Thank you all. I missed a few people. I know there's been a lot of people signing up lately, and I'm so grateful for all your support. Let me take a look over at the chat and see if there's comments or questions I can get back to. I just kind of stopped dead in my track. Tom Casey, this is pretty awesome. I went to the 10th Amendment Center YouTube channel the other day looking for some old videos, and I saw all these shorts with Michael in a suit. Man, how things have really degraded in my life lately. I'm rocking this redacted 10th Amendment t-shirt. I like to be a little bit more casual on these. You know, my great friend Tom Woods, I was in his wedding this last summer. What a great honor. It was such an awesome time with him and Jenna. But Tom's, he had me in a tux, and he's like, you look pretty good. Maybe you should start doing some videos in a tuxedo, or you should start doing your speeches dressed a little bit nicer. Tom probably thinks I'm a mess these days. But anyways, I had an opportunity of being on his show recently, and it was really a great time talking about the State of the Nullification Movement report over at 10thamendmentcenter.com/report. I can't think of the episode number over at tomwoods.com for that show, but I got a lot of great feedback from friends and supporters and some new people as well. So I hope you guys will check that out. Anyways, Tom Casey, I appreciate that comment. That was fun. And I've actually thought about, Tom is right, though. Sometimes you got to be a little bit more professional. I've always been a little bit more on the casual end and felt a little uncomfortable wearing the suit and tie, but it looks nice, and maybe I should play that up here and there. Anyways, Sharon Patriot, I appreciate you being here. Jonah Ryan says, I've been recently pointing out that the Fed inflation calculator shows a 3,000% inflation since the Fed creation. That's insane. Whatever the number is, it's absolutely crazy. I think I've seen talk about how since 1913, the purchasing power of the U.S. fiat dollar has gone down somewhere around 95 or 98%. So if you think about it, some examples that I've seen, you could buy a nice pair of shoes for $1 silver at the time, and now, well, it's significantly more than that, or at least a decent pair of shoes. Stand Up Humboldt says, checking in from crazy California here as well on the southern end. Appreciate that. Cowboy Roy Rogers says, law writing by the ATF is null and void. I would actually argue that the ATF isn't authorized to exist as well. Juliet says, thank you for mentioning the recent things, and we know the problem with all the human experiments that's been going on there, the control over health. And, it's fascinating to me that when I think about all the decision-making that have come from the so-called experts in the health field within, connected with government, and so many like local public health, national public health experts, etc. If you could even say the term public health is a real good term anyways. But I think about the so many people who maybe when 10, 15 years ago during the Iraq War would have said, this government is so dangerous. It's so dangerous today. But then some years later, when it came to potentially trusting government with the health and welfare of your parents, your grandparents, your children, your friends, all of a sudden, whatever the experts have to say, totally trusted. And I think that's a great example of how people don't trust government when the other side is doing stuff, but as soon as your people get in there, you're afraid and you want them to do whatever it takes. So thanks for mentioning that, Juliet. I appreciate it. See what else I've got here. Tom Miller says over on LinkedIn, which is pretty cool. We live stream there as well. We also live stream in Rumble. We've had some trouble over at Odyssey.com. I'm not sure what's going on. The stream goes out, but for some reason, it doesn't always get the proper audio until the archive. But Tom asks is if Congress has had time to read the U.S. Constitution. And, I like the fact that whatever that establishment hack has decided to have the House of Representatives read the Constitution. It's unfortunate. And of course, we want them to do that. But I think it's kind of a dog and pony show. I think it's just pandering. But it's good that they recognize that the way to pander is to focus on the Constitution, because you don't hear much about that when it comes to powers in Congress. It's just about, we got to get this done or we got to stop this thing. And it's all about control and basically political teams rather than the Constitution and liberty. Decentralize everything. The only way that you can have a country so big, hundreds of millions of people with a wide range of political, economic, social, religious viewpoints all living together in peace is to allow people to live the way that they want to live in their own area. The live and let live approach is really the only one that can advance liberty. Anyways, I hope you guys found this interesting. I hope it was educational. I hope it encouraged you to think and read and learn more. I will link to all the stuff that I mentioned in the show notes over at 10thamendmentcenter.com/path to liberty. Don't forget our membership program, again, /members. And I really appreciate you being here. I will see you next time. If you haven't been watching the Friday shows, I've been doing a new format called Nullification Movement News. They're 5 to 8 minute videos covering the latest news from the 10th Amendment and Nullification Movement. We're getting a lot more reach on those than I actually expected, and I'm having a little bit of fun with them as well. So I will see you next time here, hopefully on Friday, if not next week, on the Path to Liberty.